Now, the left is going nuts over this decision. And in just a second, I'm going to explain why it is that the left is losing its mind over this decision. The left believes that this is going to destroy public sector unions. The left truly believes that this decision, now that people are not forced to pay the unions, is going to destroy the public sector union wholesale. That basically people will stop paying the unions will run out of money, and then the unions will no longer have a monopoly on labor, and it will destroy the unions as they stand. The answer to that is, okay, so? Really, that's the answer. Because it is forbidden to kneecap people to force them to join a union. Pointing the government gun at people and forcing them to pay a union is no better. So if the unions can't provide services and benefits that make people want to join the union, that is their problem. The truth is that the American law in the states and the federal level have been stacked in favor of public sector unions for a very long time, and it has corrupted our entire system of government. Unions take more than $3.5 billion a year from public sector union members. Okay, they spend billions of dollars a year on politics. People are always talking about money in politics on the left. They're always talking about these big corporations. Ooh, the evil corporations that are spending money to lobby politicians and giving money to politicians. You know, folks like Cenk Uygur are constantly making this case after taking millions of dollars from outside funders to prop up their companies. Sure, you know, all of this corporate money is bad. We know corporate money is bad, but the truth is the corporate money pales in comparison to what public sector unions have been spending on politics for a very long time. Unions spend a ton of money on politics. They spend a ton of money on politics because they are bribing the public officials with whom they will have to bargain. So when people are screaming and crying about the unions not being able to force people to pay the money, understand the reason they're upset about this is because they believe that people do not want to voluntarily join unions. If they wanted to voluntarily join unions, then they would go ahead and voluntarily join unions. Now, the way the left is playing this is that the Supreme Court in the last several days, over the course of several decisions, the travel ban decision and the religious freedom decision, that they are now cutting against left-wing interest groups. What they're really cutting against is non-legal justification for political ends. Right? That's really what the Supreme Court has done here. The left has this very perverse view of the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court exists to greenlight and rubber stamp the leftist agenda. That the Supreme Court is there to benefit particular populations of people that the left wishes to benefit. So the left believes that in the travel ban case, the question is not whether the president does have executive authority under current law to actually use national security as an excuse to shut down immigration from 5 predominantly Muslim countries. And they say, no, that's religious discrimination. That's because Trump hates Muslims. And even though 92% of the world's Muslims can still enter the United States because they're not coming from these particular countries, this is obviously because the Supreme Court, like President Trump, hates Muslims. It can't be that the status of the law requires them to actually look at the law. It must be that they hate Muslims. And then when it comes to religious freedom, it can't be that the Supreme Court looked at the status of the First Amendment and said, you cannot compel people to act in artistic fashion on behalf of a group that you like. You can't do that by force of government. They say, no, that's because the Supreme Court must hate gay people. And then when it comes to this particular case, it must be that the Supreme Court hates poor people. The Supreme Court hates unions. The Supreme Court hates blue-collar workers. It can't be that the Supreme Court looks at the First Amendment and says, how in the hell can you possibly justify forcing someone at point of gun to pay an organization they don't want to join? Instead, it must be they hate unions. And it's this sort of shortcut thinking that leads to a breakdown in civil politics in our society. We're going to get to the civility in politics in just a second because the Democrats are moving radically to the left and it's happening incredibly quickly. But it is this mentality that is leading to that polarization. Every time the left sees an outcome from the right, every time they see an outcome that is based on law, based on neutral principles of law that does not cut in their favor, they immediately attribute bad motivation to the party that is pushing that particular opinion. So if I say that the First Amendment suggests that you cannot force me to join a union, or you cannot force me to pay fees into a union, their suggestion is I'm only saying that because I hate blue-collar people. It's always they go directly to the character attack. It's never that they stand and say, well, maybe this person has a little bit of justification for their point of view. Maybe it is that they believe in competing values like freedom of speech above compelled payment to collective bargaining. They can't actually credit the other side with any sort of logic or decency. Instead, they immediately go to the Supreme Court is filled with a bunch of bigots. Justice Gorsuch must be a bigot. If only we had Merrick Garland there, then he would have voted in favor of our favorite constituencies. If you believe that the purpose of the Supreme Court is to back your favorite constituencies instead of to enforce the law as it stands, to adjudicate the law as it stands, then I would suggest that you are perverting the cause of the Supreme Court. So did Alexander Hamilton, who wrote in the Federalist Papers that the minute that the judiciary begins to substitute will for judgment, it loses its raison d'etre. There's no reason for it to exist in the first place. So, the Supreme Court decision is quite good and makes a lot of sense, but the left is not going to accept it because the left has moved radically to the left. When we talk about the radical move to the left by the Democratic Party, it is obvious from yesterday's elections that this is the case. So yesterday, a guy named Joseph Crowley was ousted. He was expected to challenge Nancy Pelosi for the speakership. So how old is the Democratic Party? Nancy Pelosi is 78 years old. Joe Crowley, who is 58 years old, right, is just slightly younger than my dad. Joe Crowley was seen as the heir apparent to Nancy Pelosi. So he was the up-and-comer. He was the fresh face, the 58-year-old. Well, he was ousted yesterday in a Democratic primary by a woman named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's 28, a first-time candidate, and an open member of the Democratic Socialists of America. So she's a Bernie Sanders socialist, and she is a former bartender. She was bartending until about 5 minutes ago. She's a graduate of Boston College, or Boston University, rather, in 2011, and she is wildly to the left. When I say she's a leftist, I mean she is an insane leftist. Not only does she believe that Israel is genocidal, she also favors Medicare for all, abolishing immigration and customs enforcement. She suggests that there should be a job for everyone provided by the government. She believes that there should be a minimum wage of $15. She says, quote, "When it comes to power, we can't just be tempted by power and money alone. What we need to do is be bold enough and courageous enough to choose leadership that takes no corporate money and advances healthcare, education, and housing for all." So this is another one of her programs, is housing for all. So she is a full-scale redistributive socialist. And she's really, really radical. The reason that she won in the district is because nobody came out to vote. Only 5% of registered voters, eligible voters in this district, actually voted in this primary. It was on a really weird day. There were only a grand total of about 27,000 votes in the primary total. She won about 17,000 of those. Also, Joe Crowley did not take his district particularly seriously. He'd won 10 consecutive terms, so he didn't spend any time in that district. Nonetheless, this is the dawning of a new era for the Democratic Party. They've fully embraced Bernie Sanders' socialism and Maxine Waters' nuttiness. Here is this new hero of the Democratic Party, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Here she was today after winning the primary. She'll win the general, too, because this is a heavily Democratic district, claiming that ICE, right, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is running black sites on the border. Black sites being like CIA sites set up in Jordan to torture people. She thinks that's what's happening on the American border because she's a crazy person.
I think that ICE is right there as a part of it. It has its extrajudicial nature is baked in to the structure of the agency, and that is why they're able to get away with black sites at our border, with the separation of children. We are committing human rights abuses on this border and separating children from their families.
Okay, so one of the reasons that Joe Crowley lost this election also, number one, he wasn't radical enough for the district, but number two, one of the things that's been happening in his district is that it's moved so it's now majority-minority district. It's a heavily Hispanic district, and he was one of the last remaining Democrats living in a heavily minority district who was a white guy. So there's been a real shift in racial demographics in this particular district, and that was reflected in this election as well. She is a deep radical, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She will be treated as an up-and-comer. She'll be treated as the new heroine of the left, of course, because she's a pretty young woman, obviously, and also she is talented at what she does. So, I mean, she's a good face for the Democratic Party if you like socialism. If socialism is your thing, she's a much more attractive candidate on every possible level than Joe Crowley, except for the fact that she is a radical, insane person. So here she is talking some more in a debate about ICE and trying to go after Joe Crowley's folks, trying to suggest that Joe Crowley is not extreme enough on ICE.
If this organization is as fascist as you have called it,
I've said it's fascist.
And you have said it's fascist, then why don't you adopt the stance to eliminate it? This is a moral problem, and your response has been to apply more paperwork to this situation, to have ICE collect more information on immigrants, and that puts our communities in danger, and it also conveys a profound misunderstanding of how we should be approaching this problem.
She wasn't the only radical who was elected last night. Ben Jealous, who's the former head of the NAACP, won Maryland's Democratic primary for governor on Tuesday, and he promised to deliver an agenda that makes college free, legalizes marijuana, and raises the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour. So the Bernie Sanders full-on Medicare for all, legalized marijuana, raising the state's minimum wage. I don't care about the legalizing marijuana all that much, but making college free and raising the state minimum wage, all of this stuff is really radical stuff. And you're seeing a significant move, a really heavy move toward the far left among Democrats. Now, that clip that I just played you of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez showing righteous indignation against Joe Crowley because he doesn't want to abolish immigration and customs enforcement, because he doesn't want to abolish the people who actually enforce the border, you know, that sort of righteous indignation is now what animates the Democratic Party. It makes the Democratic Party feel special. It makes them feel as though they are authentic. This is one of the big problems in American politics generally right now, and this is true right and left, is that people are mistaking decency for insincerity. That if you are a decent person and you don't want to go after people hammer and tongs and you are not demonstrating sufficient passion, that means that you are not authentic. Really authentic people are people who can't keep their emotions in check. If you're truly authentic, you're the kind of person who pounds the table, right? You're the kind of person who looks across at your opponent and yells at them. That's true authenticity. And that's how we know that you're a decent, authentic person and you're not just a political phony, is the more you yell and the more you scream and the more emotional you are, the more we believe that you're an authentic human being. Well, I think that that is about as stupid a policy as you can have when it comes to voting for candidates. Unfortunately, it's being adopted on both sides of the aisle, but the Democrats have fully embraced this stuff, and they're moving radically to the left politically as well. President Trump said yesterday the Democrats have become the party of Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi. There's no question. Nancy Pelosi is now the moderate in the Democratic Party. Nancy Pelosi is now representing the moderate wing of the Democratic Party because the up-and-comers are all Bernie Sanders acolytes.